Well, this thing is actually starting to look like a game, but at this point there are no lose conditions. I think it's time we added some lives and a game over screen. Let's get started. If you're just joining us in this video, there's one thing you'll need, and that is a canvas with some TextMesh Pro. We've got one set up here for our score, one for our lives, and one for our level. At this point, these aren't hooked up to do anything, they're just numbers. At this point, you can head on over to your hierarchy where we're going to create a user interface panel, and we're going to use this to put our game over screen. We can call this game over panel and then head on over to the inspector, click on image, and go into color. Now here, I personally like to have an alpha of about 40, so it's fairly see-through, and I like a black color, but you can play around with whatever you like. At this point, we're going to just make this so it doesn't take up the entire screen. So we'll head up to our rect transform, where I'm going to make a buffer of about 200 on the left, 100 top, and 200 on the right and bottom as well. All right, I'm going to add a little bit of text here. So I'm just going to right click on the panel itself, go to UI, and add some TextMesh Pro. Over here in my text part of the component, I'm just going to type in game over and just make a couple of little changes. I like to use electronic highway. I'll give it a yellow color so it kind of matches the rest of my text. And you can do things like centering. Now we'll just name that as game over text. And then I'm going to use Command D to copy this twice. The first one will be for our score and the second for our high score. And for now, those will just be placeholders that we'll deal with in a later tutorial. Now I do like to make sure that these are properly anchored, and so starting with our game over text, we'll head to the rect transform here, and in our anchor presets, I just want to anchor this one to the top middle. So I'm just going to click right there, then hold down Option or Shift if you're working on PC, click that, and that will anchor it to the top middle of the panel. I do like to give it a little bit of a buffer at the top, so let's move it down just a little. Now for our score text and high score text, I'm also going to anchor those, though in this case, I'm going to anchor them based on the bottom center. Now that they're anchored there, we can move them to the side. And we'll play with those a little bit later, but for now, that's looking just fine. With that panel created, we're now ready to do a little bit of coding. So let's head down to our assets window here into our scripts folder where we can right click and create a new C# script. And I'm just going to call this one Lives Manager. All right, so there's two main things we're going to need to do here. We need to keep track of our lives, and then we also want to make sure that when the lives run out, our game over panel comes up. So just going to start at the top here by creating a public integer called current live. This will be the one that keeps track of our lives, and in fact for now I'm going to set that value automatically to be equal to 5. I'm going to get rid of my start and update method as I'm not going to need those, and I'm going to create a new public method, and we'll call this one lose life. This will be called from our ball script, so whenever it goes out of bounds it will call this, but essentially all it's going to do is it's just going to take current lives and it's going to minus 1. I'm going to do a check at this point, and we're just going to look to see if our current lives is less than or equal to 0. Now if that is the case, we want to have our game stop, and we also want to have our panel come up that announces the end of the game. So first of all, we will take our time.time scale. So similar to what we did in our pause tutorial, we're going to make that equal to 0, which will just stop time in the game. We also want to make sure that our panel comes on. So back up here, we're going to make another public reference, this time to the game object of the game over panel. So we'll stop the game or pause the time and have the game over panel dot set active equal to true. All right, now back in Unity, we've created a score manager already, and I want to do the same idea for our lives manager. So you can right click in the hierarchy, create an empty. Let's call this Lives Manager, and this is just going to be an empty object that houses our script. So while clicked on that, we can head over to our inspector and add component. Let's get our Lives Manager. Excellent, and the only thing we need to change here is we just need to let it know where our game over panel is. So I'm going to grab that panel, drag it on over here, and at this point I can actually turn that panel off so that at the start of the game it doesn't appear, and it will just get turned on when we run out of lives. All right, the last thing we need to do is we just need to actually make a mechanism so that our lives count down. We're going to do this through our ball controller, so let's click on that. Now in our ball controller, we already have a check running that checks to see if the ball reaches its minimum position, so if it goes out of bounds, and then it resets itself. Now what we also want to do here is make sure that as soon as it goes out of bounds, it allows our Lives Manager script to know that we've lost a life. And so let's head up to the top here. And first of all, we just need to make it so that the script can talk to our Lives Manager. So let's make a public reference to the Lives Manager, and we'll call this one Lives Manager with a lowercase l. And so now what we can do is come down here, and when the ball goes out of bounds, before it resets or anything, we're going to go Lives Manager dot, and if we click on our Lives Manager script, you'll remember that we called this lose life. So we're going to type Lives Manager dot lose life, and then just our brackets because we're running a function here, and this will automatically call that lose life function in our Lives Manager, which will pause the game and turn on the game over panel if we are out of lives entirely. Now back in Unity, we'll need to set this up so you can click on your ball, and over in the inspector you'll notice that there's now a place because it wants to know how to talk to the Lives Manager, so you can just drag your Lives Manager into that slot. With that done, you'll now notice when the ball goes out of bounds that our lives count down over here in the inspector, but they aren't currently hooked up to the actual UI, and so that's the final thing that we're going to need to do here. Though it does work, our game over screen is popping up when we run out of lives. So our final step at this point is just going to be to head into our Lives Manager, and it just needs a chance to talk to our TextMesh Pro. So we're going to head to the very top here, and we're just going to let it know that we are using TM Pro. And then we'll make a reference to our text. So public tmp underscore text, and we'll call this one lives text. Then all we want to do is make sure that each time our lives count down, before we check to see if we're out of lives even, we want to update that text. So we'll type in lives text dot text, because we want to access the actual text itself, is now going to be set to be equal to our current lives. And it won't like this right now because we're trying to create a string, which is text, using an integer. So we need to just turn that to a string as well. Okay, the final setup we need to do in Unity now is just to click on our Lives Manager and let it know where to find the lives text, which is just up here on our canvas, and we've called it lives, so I'll just drag that in there. With that done, we'll now notice that our lives are counting down each time the ball goes out of bounds. And eventually, once we have lost all of our lives, we get a game over screen displaying 2 scores, which will hook up later on in this series. All right, I hope you've found this useful. If you have, please be sure to click like or subscribe to the channel. Until next time, this is Matt with Night Run Studio. Cheers.